All right. Well, I'm Sean Davis. I'll introduce myself a little more here in a minute, but just today going to talk about just efficient design, whether you're a developer who's never done anything with like a design phase before, or you are a designer and might just want to learn a few tips and tricks. Hopefully, I'll be able to teach you some of that. And we're going to look at Sketch, InVision, and Zeppelin, the three tools that we use here at CRI. So just kind of real quick background. So I work here at CRI, design lead. I've been here about a little over 3 years. I went to UNO. I got my BA in studio art, concentration in graphic design, and background's definitely graphic design heavy, but just a little web development sort of work. And then obviously just the exposures I had being around developers like yourself. Why I like mobile design. So being designer, I like being creative, but I also like the sort of structured world that you have to live within for native design or hybrid design, but just the web and mobile world, it definitely has some unique structures behind it. I like that it's continuously changing and evolving. So every time a new OS comes out, there's little changes. So kind of adapting to those. And then just the user experience practice in general provides kind of these data-driven decisions. It takes sort of a load off of you because you're doing some research, getting some feedback. You're not just sort of guessing what you think the best design is. You're actually validating these designs and making your decisions based off that, so you have something to back it up. We'll talk a little bit more about that process too here in a bit. Why you should like mobile design? Well, obviously, well-designed apps make tasks easier for users. They make apps more accessible to users, and this is not only just users that have disabilities, visual impairments, but also users who speak a different language or from a different country with different cultures. Accessibility is a pretty broad term, but yeah, it can mean a lot of different things. Well-designed apps are adaptable, so again, as new design patterns change, your app can respond to those and kind of stay up to date. Well-designed apps also increase conversion and adoption. If it's easy to use and people like using it, they're going to keep using it and sign up for whatever you've got going on. And then well-designed apps are talked about. So if you just really knock something out of the park, people will talk about it, people will compare it to other apps, even if they're not in the same category of app. You could have a banking app that's just really awesome, and people might recognize it not just as an awesome banking app, but as an awesome app in general. So just real high level design phase talk here. So the idea of having a design phase before you even start development has a few goals. Obviously, it's before development starts, but it helps you establish a look and feel before you even start building anything. It can define some flows. You can validate through the user experience process and make sure that's all nailed down before you build anything. And it's also a good way to get stakeholder sign-off. A lot of if you have a customer that you're building an app for, they might have a hard time handing over the money without even seeing what you're going to be building. So when you can design everything up front and present them a prototype, they're a little more comfortable with seeing, okay, this is what we're building, and yes, we like this. And then ultimately, the goal is to save development rework. So you're trying to figure out what those potential issues might be during the design phase, because it's a lot faster, it's a lot cheaper to fix those then, as opposed to once it's actually developed and you're going back and trying to rework that. So just a high-level design process, this is going to be a little different depending on the team you work with. If you're just maybe a hobbyist, it might be a little different. But the general idea is starting off with just an ideation phase, moving into mock-ups, building a prototype, and then if you're having a developer do the development for you, handing it off to them. And what this looks like in just a little more detail during the ideation phase is where you're going to brainstorm with your client or your customer, And part of that brainstorming period is not only just figuring out what the app's going to do, but if they have any specific business requirements or restrictions, finding those out ahead of time is going to help you out a lot. During this phase is a good time to do user research. So if you have current users, you might survey them or interview them, get some feedback from them for issues that they're having currently. If this is a totally new app or a new website, go and find maybe prospects, people who aren't customers now, but you think are going to fit your target once you go live, and try and get some feedback from them. There's also some companies that just do national user research. So if you're not looking for something super targeted, you can get a good idea of, age groups and how they're using different platforms, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of good information out there. There's also just a lot of good blogs that you can follow, that sort of thing. And then if your customer has a real strong brand identity, learning some about their branding and their style guide is good to do up front, because then you can apply that towards those mockups as you're moving forward. You want to keep that identity consistent. When you get into mockups, this is when you start actually building the hi-fi mockups. And what we do, we'll get into this, is start off by building symbols. So really just building those individual elements instead of just going right into a big screen. Kind of figure out from that branding and style guide, figure out, okay, we want all of our buttons to look like this, our text fields to look like that. And when you can build those into a symbol up front, your design work kind of becomes copy and paste. You can just bring those symbols in and modify them. And it makes the hi-fi phase a lot faster. Wireframe, I put as needed. There's kind of two different trains of thought. There's the group that says wireframe everything up front, then build a few hi-fis after that. I was that way, and lately I've been liking the idea of build a real strong symbol library first, so then you can build hi-fis really fast. It eliminates a lot of problems where people look at a wireframe prototype and have questions of, okay, but what is this actually going to look like once it's designed? I still wireframe as needed, and a lot of times it's just pen and paper. It might just be write in Sketch, putting something together quickly, but when you can build it just as fast as a hi-fi, it just eliminates a lot of those kind of still open questions that people might have when they're testing it. And then moving from the mock-up phase to the prototype phase, obviously mock up all your screens and your flows, and then you can build those into a prototype that users can actually interact with. And once you have that prototype, that's when it's good to actually sit down and do some user validation testing, putting that prototype in front of potential users, current users, and actually running them through a few different scenarios. So make up some real life scenarios, have them run through it, and just get some feedback from them. Or even just let them explore the prototype just as they naturally would. It's pretty amazing how many things that even if you have a group of people looking at it, just because you know the product so well, you might overlook some things. Once you get in front of a customer, they'll start pointing things out that, oh, you just didn't even think of. Once you get some of that feedback, you're going to go through probably a couple different iterations of that design, go back and do user validation testing. And then once everything's solid, then you can share those design specs with a developer if you're not developing it yourself. And these are kind of how the three different tools I'm going to talk about line up. We use Sketch for mockups, we use InVision for prototypes, and we use Zeppelin for that developer handoff. So before I get straight into demoing what these tools can do, I just want to talk a little bit more detail about what each tool is specifically, some other alternatives, just if you're interested in seeing what else is out there, and the pricing also. I know that's important for some people. So Sketch is a vector-based UI design tool. We use it for hi-fi mockups. You can use it for wireframes too. It is available for Mac only. Why we like it is that it has a really large like plugin support. So if there's something Sketch can't do right out of the box, There's probably a plugin out there already made to do what you need it to do, and if not, you can make your own plugin. It's also, just in the past couple years, has started to get recognized by Google and Apple, and they're now making sketch files for their own UI kits. Before, you could only find like a Photoshop file. And what these UI kits do is they give you those native elements pre-built. So again, you're just kind of copying and pasting things. It makes things really quick and really efficient. My favorite part is symbols and overrides. I talked a little bit about symbols before. We'll look at that in the demo. They're pretty neat. And then, in my opinion, just the fact that it is UI design focused. There's a lot of tools that people use out there that weren't originally made to be UI design tools, and they've just kind of adapted to that. So it just has a lot of things built in that are just perfect for different screen densities and resolutions and responsive design and that sort of thing. If you just want to know what other alternatives are out there, or if you're a PC user so you can't use Sketch, Adobe has a few different options in their Creative Suite. Photoshop was a long time kind of front runner there. I never really understood why Photoshop was as popular as it was, because it's like a rasterized based photo editing tool. It just never really worked that well for me. I used Illustrator quite a bit before switching to Sketch, but between the time I switched to Sketch and was using Illustrator, they've come out with Adobe XD, which is basically a Sketch competitor. I've heard a lot of people who use it say it almost looks just like Sketch. So if you already have the Adobe Creative Suite, whether your business that you're working for buys it or whatever, it's definitely something to look into, Adobe XD. InVision Studio, so we use InVision for prototyping, but they're actually building their own Sketch competitor, their own UI design tool. I believe it's still kind of in a private invite-only beta. You can get on a list if you can get access. But once that comes out, that should be pretty interesting. And then Affinity is the name of another design tool that I know a lot of people use. I've never used it, but I know it's fairly popular. So if you're just looking for some options, there you go. The cost, if you want to just try it out, it's free. Otherwise, it's $99 a year. If you're a student, you can get 50% off. If you're a school and you're looking to put together like a computer lab with Sketch on it, they can hook you up for free. The cool thing about Sketch is it's $99 a year, and for that year, you get all the updates that come out. But at the end of that year, you don't get totally cut off. You can stay on that last update that you have and just use it indefinitely. So it's nice if you just want to give it a try, or maybe you just kind of shift focus and no longer are doing design. You can still hang on to it and kind of mess with it. But if you're planning on continuing your design work, I would definitely suggest to continue your subscription, because they come out with a lot of pretty cool updates. InVision is what we use for prototyping, and it actually has some project management tools built in too. So if you want to track like where your screens are in your process of being approved, or still in progress, or they're done, it can do some of that, and it has some client collaboration features built in also. It is web-based, so whether you're Mac or PC, you can access it. The reason we like it is that it's super fast and realistic. Has a lot of built-in transitions that mimic native transitions, and the big thing is that it has Craft, which is their plugin for Sketch, and I think it's also available for Photoshop. The plugin is Mac only. They did have a Windows version, and I believe they discontinued support for it, but you might still be able to find it. But what the Craft plugin does is it gives you a way to quickly sync your artboards from Sketch into your prototype. It allows you to do your prototyping directly in Sketch, so you barely even have to go to the InVision website. And then it has this section called Data, which we'll look at, which lets you just quickly fill if you need a quick fake name for a person, or a news article title, or an image. You can pull stuff from different stock libraries that they have. So again, just makes things really quick. Alternatives, Proto.io, UXPin, Adobe XD, again, has some prototyping stuff built into it. Framer. These are all good if you're trying to prototype out like an entire app at once or a big section of an app. These related ones, Origami Studio and Printable, they're pretty cool, but they're more focused on if there's one specific interaction that you were wanting to prototype. They're really good at that. So if I want to hit this button and it expands a specific way to turn into something else, you can do that with those tools. And I know Origami Studio even can interact with like the sensors on your device. So as you rotate your device, it can actually change the prototype for you. So it's cool. Again, it's more useful, I think, for those smaller interactions. Though, if you try and build a whole app with those, it gets just very bulky and very complicated. With InVision, you can have one prototype for free, and that's not 30 days. That's just for as long as you need it. And then the pricing structures break out like that. With InVision, if you have one prototype for free, for example, but that's one active prototype. If you archive that, you can then open up another project and start building that. You just can't share that archived one with anyone. So if you want to try it out, or you're only ever working on one project at a time, you could probably get by with that. And then lastly, with Zeppelin here, so it's what we use basically to build a style guide and do our asset handoff to our developers. And it's both Mac, Windows, and web-based. And reasons we like it is because it allows the developer to look at a mock-up and be able to inspect it and see all those specs and colors. They can export assets right out of Zeppelin, and when you export it, it even goes directly like into Xcode if you're using that, or I'm not sure if it works the same for Android, but it's pretty nicely integrated with your developer tools. And it'll actually create some code snippets too, so you can actually copy, some XML or some CSS if it's web. It does a little text style and color organization, so if in Sketch you actually build out text styles, it'll import those in. And it's also just a nice communication channel between developers and designers. You can leave comments on mockups and actually tag little specific areas so you can see exactly what you're talking about. As you update and maybe upload a new version of a mockup, it has a whole versioning system built in. You can leave little commit messages with what's updated. So it's just a nice way to kind of keep track of things. Another alternative, InVision also has what they call Inspect, and it's basically the same thing as Zeppelin. There's just a few really kind of small reasons we decided to stay with Zeppelin instead of going with InVision. But if you're looking to subscribe to InVision, you could get by with using InVision for prototyping, InVision Studio for designing, and InVision Inspect for this handoff. Similarly with InVision, you have one project for free, and then if you need more, it just kind of builds up from there. And also similar with InVision, you can archive a project and then start a new one. So if you are only doing one project at a time, or maybe only 3 projects at a time, you can get by with some of those smaller packages. So I'll jump into a bit of a demo here. So I'm going to start off. We're going to start off in Sketch, and now I've pre-built a few screens here just to keep things sped up. This is, in theory, an app. It has 3 tabs: a weather tab, a news tab, and then a settings tab, which is just blank right now. And before I get too deep in here, so we're in Sketch, but everything over on this bar, not over here, but just this thin bar right here, is that Craft plugin. And so if you see me going here, that's the Craft plugin. Otherwise, everything else should be just Sketch. I'll try and call out anytime it's not, just so you know where that line is kind of being crossed. So we'll just dive into here. So one of the first things I do want to show is craft data, which I was talking about a little bit. And I'll zoom in just a little bit more here so we can see this. So craft data is really good if you're just looking for quick random text or random images to use as placeholders. For example, your current weather conditions. It displays a city name, maybe has a background for the city. If you don't want to just use Omaha all the time or some other city name, you can come into here and click on type, and these are all the different text type placeholder generators that craft data will give you, and you can actually build some of your own too, just from their items. I'm not really sure where they're pulling the data from. I think some of them are like actual news articles and such. But for example, we have one city, so we want a random city name. We can just hit the city icon here, and it changes the name. And so you can just kind of shuffle through until you find one you like. You can do the same thing with photos as well. So if you go over to the Photos tab, again, you can set up either pull from just a folder of photos you have on your hard drive, from Dropbox or from Unsplash.com. Unsplash is just a stock photography website that users contribute to, and everything's free. And if you're using Unsplash, you can come in, again, make your own, and you can choose from basically any category they have. So you want pictures of Earth or fashion or London, New York. You can set up your own. I just have a few set up here, and since this is a weather app and we want a picture of a city, we can just hit city, and it just randomly pulls a picture of a city. So if you're just looking to make some quick mock-ups and you don't want to spend a whole lot of time like trying to find a specific picture, you can just come in here and pull any images. So we'll get into craft a little bit more later. I want to start talking about these symbols that I've been kind of raving about. So again, weather app, we have some hourly weather information right here. All of these items are symbols, and if you double click on them, it takes you over to your symbols page where your symbols live. And so we just have one symbol, shows 7 p.m. it's sunny. But when you come back over here, you can see all these symbols actually have different information on them. And so the cool thing about Sketch and their symbols is that they have this overrides panel where if you name your layers just right and kind of place things, you can come in here and instead of saying 7 p.m., we could hit 10 and it updates to 10 p.m. Same thing with, like, we have the kind of partially cloudy. I've set this up so you can come through and then just pick from a whole list of different other conditions. And so instead of what you've seen before is you could have a symbol, but there's no really good way to modify it. So you're just kind of stuck with that unless you're breaking it apart and modifying it, but then it's no longer linked to the symbol. Here you can go through and enter all these overrides. And then if you decide, I want my time to be over here and the condition to be over here, you can change the symbol, and then when you come back, everything's changed and it remembers all of those overrides. So you can make just one instance of it, apply all your overrides, and if you need to make a change, you can do it. Same thing, like if you want to change the text color from black to red for some reason, you come in and now all of your temperatures are in red. You can look real quick at how you can make a symbol kind of from scratch here. So I've started, all these elements are just laying on this artboard. They're not even in a group. But let's pretend that this is like a news feed, so we're going to have multiple of these eventually. So we want to make a symbol so we can duplicate this. I've put just some placeholder text already in here using craft data. We have an image that we want to put up here. One thing you may run into just messing around, this is kind of a cool trick. This is a rounded rectangle, so all 4 corners are rounded. But on this card, I don't really want the bottom 2 corners to be rounded. So if you're familiar with CSS, and I'm sure some other languages do this too, you can come in and right now it just has 8. You can individually round every corner from the top left clockwise all the way around. So we want the top left to be 8, we want the top right to be 8, and we want the bottom 2 to be 0. So we'll just go ahead and enter that combination separated by semicolons, and you have, you know, just straight 90-degree corners now at the bottom. I'll also go in, so we have an article and it's kind of technology related. I'm going to pull a photo, and now we have a picture of some sort of maybe a soundboard or something like that. Inkjet cartridge, who knows what's going on here, but so now we have all these here. We want to make a symbol out of it. Before we do that, one thing that's good to do is name all of your layers. I've already done that. That way when you go to apply your overrides, you know what is what. And then also go through and build it so if you need to resize it, it's not going to stretch things and do things weird. So you have some kind of auto layout type tools built into Sketch. This image, for example, we want to say the height stays the same, so I'm going to hit fixed height. And then we want it to stay locked to the top and stay full width. So I'm just hitting the top, the left, and the right here on resizing. Same thing with this like bookmark icon. I don't want it to change width or height, so I'm going to lock both of those and then pin it to the top and the right corner. Hopefully you guys can see that. Same thing with this text real quick. Since this image is fixed height, I want to pin it to the top and the left and the right. It has these margins, and when you pin it left and right, it'll remember those margins, so those won't change when we resize it. And then this bottom one, it's okay if this one gets taller, so we're going to pin it to the top, just pin it everywhere, but not set fixed height or fixed width. So now when we go in and group this, it should have all that, yep, still saved in there. And when we go to resize, I'm making it taller, but it's not stretching my image out. When I make it narrower, my bookmark stays the right spacing from that corner, but it's not stretching or doing anything strange. And then when you're ready to make it a symbol, you can just click on it and hit create symbol. We'll name this news card. And now it's a symbol, and you can see all these overrides pop up over here. So you can manually enter your override information, or you can go back and use craft data. And even though it's a group, you can say, you know, headline. We'll do another technology headline here. And since it's a group, it gives you options for layers that have text. So we're going to swap the title layer out. And so Apple iWork 08. Awesome. So we have one symbol instance here, but obviously this would be a news feed. So another cool area of craft is what they call duplicate. So if you have one element you need to duplicate a whole bunch of times and keep a even spacing between them, you can just come in here. We're going to duplicate this vertically. You can do horizontally, or you can do both. Let's say we replicate this 3 times and we want, you know, 8 points between them. It'll go ahead and duplicate them, and it actually fetches new data from craft data. Oops. Or mostly new data. Ugly MySpace profile. And so you can see all 3 are in here. Didn't get that. It's using the same image for that second one, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and bring that down there. So just a real quick way, built a news feed, everything you can resize, and it works pretty nicely. And when you double click on these, when it duplicates it, basically just makes a group of however many you chose to duplicate. And you can click on it again and then get to that card that you built. Let's say, okay, I don't like this image being the way it is. We want it to be more of like a circle. So I'm going to go in here and just change it to a circle like this. Now when we return back to that instance, all the items in that news feed have changed. So symbols are really nice if you're building out, you can do this with like the tab bar at the bottom, that's a symbol. So if you have a whole app built out with 100 pages and you need to update your tab bar, you don't have to go through and manually do that for every page. Just going to bring this down so it fits a little nicer. So that's just kind of a quick building of a few mock-ups and how those symbols work. Now let's talk about prototyping in some of these hotspots. So down here at the bottom of the Craft plugin bar is this kind of lightning bolt icon, and when you turn that on, you start seeing these blue lines, and these blue lines are all indicating things that have hotspots already and where they're going. And so this is one of the tab bar icons, and this is actually where its symbol kind of lives. And so I've just set this icon links to this page, and now every instance of this tab bar will just automatically link over to that page. We want to also say, okay, anytime I click on a card here, I want it to link over to an article. And so I just selected that layer. If you have the plugin installed, you just hit C on the keyboard and you select what artboard you want to link to, and you can select what sort of transition you want. We'll just go with a native push left animation. I've already set news here to link back also, and it'll push the other way. We can also do our weather page here real quick. Let me get the title bar also. Oops. Paste that because we have this segmented control that we want to be able to tab between. And so again, I'm just modifying these overrides I set up. So now we have the 3 different states that this page could be in. And kind of one downside or one tricky thing to work around, because this is a symbol, I can't just click on these individual things, so I'm just going to throw a couple rectangles on here just to act as my hotspots. I'm going to make them so you won't see them, but when I export this into InVision, InVision will recognize them. So I'm just going to set one for wind. This one's going to go over here. And you can copy hotspots and paste them on your other artboards, and it remembers where they're supposed to go. Let's see, we need one to go back to temperature here also. So, whoops. There we go. You may also see you can also just choose to go to an external URL, and if you're on like InVision's mobile app, it'll actually slide up a mobile screen and actually take you to that website. Or you can just link back or close. So you can do like overlays instead of just going to a different screen. And if you have it set like an X on an overlay, you could set it just to close, and no matter where you pull that overlay up, it'll just close it and take you back to the last screen. But we want this one to go to temperature. So paste that in place. You can see we got our arrows going everywhere. So now we'll go ahead and bring this into InVision. So I hit this sync icon up here, which will open up. I've just got my weather app. I've already set up the project in InVision. It's pretty easy to do. And once it syncs here, we'll then pull this up. When you first start an InVision account, it gives you a whole bunch of just kind of sample like projects and mood boards, so you can play around with those. I'll go ahead and open this here. This is the view screen where you can actually interact with it. Before we get in there, I'm going to go into the build screen, and you can see these orange squares. Those represent all those hotspots that I made right in Sketch. One thing that's also good to do, I'm sure it's hard to read for you guys, but there's these fixed header and fixed footer area. So if you have like a tab bar and a nav bar that you want to stay locked to the top or the bottom of the screen, you'd want to set those. That way they're not scrolling off when you're scrolling. So you can see the weather's up there, tab bar's down there. You can scroll and those stay in put. And then we set these hotspots here. Look like, I'm not sure why our hotspots there didn't come through. But if we go to news, for example, we can click on that article. Oh, and it didn't update this guy. Let me just select all these again real quick and try once more. There we go. So now we should be able to, I hope, go here and we see temp, wind. Those are all set. Oh, here's one kind of trick that gets me all the time. See how it's scrolling to the top? There's actually a setting where you can choose to maintain scroll position. So I'm just going to hit that real quick. Then that way when you tap on it, it remembers how far down the screen you've scrolled, and you won't have to scroll again. I'll let that sync up here. There we go. So now we can go back between these. It remembers your scroll position, and if we had other things changing on the screen, you'd see that happening too. One thing that's also cool, I'll show real quick here, just on my phone. So I have the Envision app installed on my phone, so I can pull it up, and it's loading it right now. And now you can actually interact with it right on your phone. Super realistic. So if you're getting like a focus group together or just some users you want to share the app with, this is a good route. You can tap around. A lot of times when we do this, the people who are looking at it think it's an actual app, and you kind of have to explain to them like it's not really an app. Some things might seem kind of strange, but pretend it's an app because that's what we're going for, really. So once you've gone through, you've built your prototype, last thing you want to do is then share these screens with a developer. So we're going to select just some of these main screens here. We're going to go up to plugins and go to the Zeppelin plugin and hit export selected artboards. Again, I set up a Zeppelin project already just for the sake of time, but we'll go ahead and export that. It opens up Zeppelin for me, and we'll go into the project here. And so once you're in here and you're trying to figure out, okay, what is the size of everything, you can start clicking around and see, okay, this image is 266 points high. Or you can tap on this segmented control and see the height and the color of it. If you have things that are exportable, like these icons are down here, you can click on those and export them. And since this is an iOS project, it just automatically sets it to 3 PNGs and 1 PDF. If you're an Android project, you get your appropriate sizes, and same thing on web, you get just like a 1x, 2x, and SVG version of it. You can come in and let's say you want to leave some sort of comment about how this graph works. You can hold Command and click and just say something here. Then anyone else who has access to the project can see that information, and then you can also see that version history and kind of click back and forth between changes you've made. And if you've uploaded something, it's good to leave a message just so you know what exactly changed if it's something subtle. So that's kind of just a quick crash course of the different tools. Are there any questions, or is there anything anyone's interested in learning more about? Matt?
Can you rotate your device to landscape?
No, unfortunately not, at least not with Envision. You can, when you're doing your mock-ups, obviously you can make your artboard landscape. I'm not sure. I know if you have a portrait prototype and you try and rotate, so you can view it just in Envision's app, or you can go to the website and view it. If you try and like rotate the website view, it actually tells you rotate it back. So it doesn't really do anything responsive that way. Maybe someday.
So you're doing all that design work there, laying out everything in the sketch, and then in the browser
That was Envision.
so how does that link together then?
Yeah, that's all through that Craft plugin that Envision makes. So it installs into Sketch, and you sign in, the first time, and then it lets you select. You can also, if you have the file and don't have the plugin, you can just upload that file directly into Envision, that Sketch file, or you can do individual like JPEGs or PNG images also. So if you're not even using any of these that don't really interface with Envision, you can take pictures of napkins that you drew on and hotspot all those together.
So that's kind of just a different way of exporting.
Yeah, that way you can just kind of stay in Sketch, export, and then continue on working. And that also gives you the ability to set your hotspots right in Sketch, so you can actually select a button in your design and tell it this layer is a hotspot to this page. If you set up your hotspots on Envision, you're just laying a box over the screen, and if you move that button, it doesn't know you moved that button. If you do it in Sketch, it does, and it'll just move the hotspot with it.
Sketch is kind of, or your Envision is more or less kind of like a place to dump it in. It gives it that functionality like you're in your mobile device then.
Yeah. Sketch does have some prototyping built in. They just released it in the last update, but it's pretty rudimentary right now. It doesn't have like the fixed header stuff you can deal with, so it just scrolls everything. Doesn't have quite the same like transitions you can choose from. But yeah, so you're basically building everything in Sketch, and then you dump it into Envision so you can have it be something to interact with.
It's kind of the Craft plugin is really the big. Like if you didn't have that, it'd kind of be a little bit more involved.
Right, yeah, it'd be a little more tedious, for sure.
When you're setting like layout constraints, do the constraints ever show up in Zeppelin or anything like that? I feel like I kind of have to guess where, like, oh, this is probably top left, and it's probably.
Yeah, I don't believe it does right now.
I just want to make sure I'm not crazy because okay.
It seems like it should, right? Like you're doing all that in Sketch.
Yeah.
So how can you get that
Yeah.
to a developer?
Yeah.
A lot of times we'll just leave like a comment or something that says this is supposed to be pinned here.
Sure.
Or, Johnny?
I was going to say you should show the style guide.
Oh.
And then also, like, to that point, you can kind of hold on assets and hold Alt. I don't know. I think it's Alt to, like, see the good margins.
Mm-hmm.
How far should this be? So I know that's something I have to use all the time. Or you just hover on, like, the edge of the screen or up there.
Right. So like this moon icon, when you click on it and then kind of hover on like the edge of the screen, it shows, okay, this is 15 points from the edge. This title is 16 points from the tab bar there. You can get, like when you hold Alt, it'll give you percentages too. So if something is supposed to be, half of a screen height or something, you can see that also. And then the style guide section. So in that Sketch project, I set all of these text styles just to use. These are actually just iOS native text styles. If you have the UI kit that you downloaded directly from Apple, you can copy all of these out of it and bring it into your project, and it just automatically generates those. And since these are text styles in Sketch, it recognizes them and brings them in here. And you can see on the right here how it's created some of this Swift code. It'll do that also. It must. I guess it doesn't do it for iOS projects, but if you have like a web or an Android project, it'll also give you some code for more specific items, like as you're clicking around on them.
So with that, I guess, working on mobile here, but those tools, are any of those, those kind of work for web as well, then, or is it
Yeah. So when you're in Sketch and you're starting a new file, you can choose new from template and choose. They used to have Apple template, but since they came out with their own UI kit, they took it out of Sketch and they just let you download it. But you can choose a web design, material design, and no matter what template you start from, you can always insert a new artboard. And you can choose. Let's say we're doing responsive web, and then it gives you a few just different artboards to start with. You can do landscape or portrait. When you bring it into InVision, when you're starting that project, it asks you, is this an Android, is this a iOS, or is this a web project? And then it kind of adapts the prototype to that also. If it's a web project, you can just, when you go to that web browser, it sort of just looks like you're on what your website would be. If you do an iOS project, you can actually come in and change like what sort of phone you want this to show on. So if we want it on a black phone instead of a white phone, a 6 or a 5 or a 4. Same thing with Android. You can choose from several different Android phones. So yeah, it'll work with Web 2 pretty nicely. Again, it doesn't really have like the responsiveness built into InVision. And so we just end up basically making like 3 or 4 mock-ups that kind of show how between these main sizes, this is how it changes.
For those that don't want that third tool, maybe you can show the build or the inspect.
Yeah, so if you don't want to get Zeppelin, you can pull up inspect right in here, and it gives you basically the same sort of information. I know we're a little... So I've clicked on this moon and it's giving me a height and it's like X and Y position over here. One of the things that we didn't like about it as much is that it reveals like all of these layers, which sometimes is almost too much information, I think. But depending on how you're setting things up, I could definitely see for certain teams that might be useful to see all those. You can also get into like leaving comments. This is the comment page, and then InVision also has a history built in. So as you upload new versions, you can go through and see how things have changed. Any other questions? If you'd like, you can stick around and I can show you some things too if there's anything more detailed you're looking for. Otherwise, yeah, thank you guys. If you have ideas of just anything else you might like to hear at another Talk 2 sometime, let me know. If there's one specific area that you'd just like to see more of.
I guess, how many other, I've heard of like Axure, is that mock-up tool you've ever used before?
I haven't used it now, so I can't really comment much about it.
If you kind of evaluated all options and feel like these are the best ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've looked at the biggest names that have the most like resources available for them. I'm sure there's things that some of those other tools are really good at, but just the fact that you can't get like an official UI kit from Apple for them, or they don't have like the Craft plugin, those sorts of things. So yeah, this seemed to be the best supported tools from sort of the big companies, and they just all worked really nicely together. That was ultimately, I think, why we landed on this package.
Is that because you're working with Swift, or are you working? How do you develop?
We do mobile development mostly here. We do web also. If you're just doing web and you don't need those UI kits, then that kind of opens the door, I think, a little more.
Yeah. Because we actually use Axure.
Yeah.
And because we have both web, and to me it doesn't do the greatest job for iOS, but,
Yeah.
but it's what they have,
Yeah.
So I was curious, when you do this, what does it give your developers? Just the look and feel?
Yeah. So they get a look and feel, and they also get just an idea of what a flow is supposed to be. So you could define this all in like acceptance criteria, you know, how where everything's supposed to flow. But when you can just sit down and actually see like, oh, this is supposed to go here, just makes it a little easier to digest. It also gives them a good opportunity to say like, whoa, this isn't how it should be. Is this what you meant? And then we can reevaluate or make a change. So the prototype part is really more for when we're doing that user validation testing. But it's got that benefit of developers can use it too.
Do you use the external libraries a lot with Sketch?
Not a ton. I think I just have one like linked library set up. We haven't really. So this is that iOS library, and it's a linked library. So no matter what project I'm in, it shows up, so I can just grab things real quick. We haven't really gone through the process of like building a library that we all share, and a lot of that's because we just have so many different projects, and it's usually just a small number of people on one project. It doesn't really make sense to build an external library. But definitely, if you're a big team working on one big product, do you guys use them? Yeah.
Yeah, we have a symbol library just for colors, and then I have an icon one that has masks. So
Yeah.
you know, icon coloring across the board, and then every project is its own sketch file within the individual apps. So
Right.
we have 4 or 5 libraries.
Yeah. Do you use craft libraries at all?
No,
Or just the-
libraries, just
Okay.
we use Craft to do all the.
Yeah, because I know they have libraries, but I think they might have built that before Sketch actually had them or something. Like I've never really understood why you would use crafts when Sketch kind of has their own.
What kind of support does it have for like form input fields like a type ahead or like a range selector? Is there anything?
You're kind of faking everything, and so like typically we'll have a couple different screens of just the different states. There's no way to like actually enter text or select something, so we'll just have it. We'll have a text field be a hotspot, and when you tap on it, it'll just go to the next mockup, which shows the keyboard up and shows the text field highlighted.
Your examples were all for iOS. How does it work with like Android with their like multiple different screen resolution sizes?
Yeah,
What-
you kind of have to pick a size that you want to prototype in. Sort of the same thing with iOS, like an iPhone SE, an iPhone 8, 8 Plus, they're all different sizes. And so we just go like with an iPhone 8 size because it's the most in between. If you're doing Android, you might want to pick, something in between, unless a lot of our users use this phone, and so you might mock up on that size instead. Or if you're building for a very specific tablet, maybe it's an internal tool for business, and they're all going to use this tablet, then you can choose that size instead.
Oh, the reason I made that unpleasant noise was that we do a lot of our mock-ups in iPhone 8 size as well, and then nothing ever fits on the iPhone SE.
Yeah.
So we've started.
That's how that phone's meant to work.
So we started, designing things initially on the smaller layout, and then making sure they look okay on the 8 Plus.
Yeah.
What's like mobile first?
Yeah, but small mobile. Any other questions? Well, thank you guys. Feel free to hang.
Thank you.
I think there's more pizza and beer. Help yourself.